People do not suffer because of what happened, but because of how they choose to look at what happened. That quote is not only a profound reflection on the human condition, but also the red thread running through the entire book in your hands. This work is not a manual offering 10 steps to achieve happiness, nor is it a sedative of empty platitudes. It is constructed in the form of a fierce dialogue between two extremes. On one side is a young man filled with resentment, longing for recognition yet trapped in a deep sense of inferiority. On the other side is an elderly philosopher, calm yet resolute, one who does not hesitate to shatter every conventional assumption about the past, about value, and about happiness on the surface. While these may seem like mere debates centered on the ideas of Alfred Adler, at a deeper level, they serve as a mirror that forces every reader to face themselves. Every argument in the book is like a definitive, painful cut, yet enough to rip open the veil of illusion. It points out that memory is not destiny, inferiority is not essence. The need for recognition is not the sole source of value, and happiness is not a prize waiting at the finish line, but something hiding in the present moment itself. Therefore, this book does not invite us on a safe journey. Instead, it throws us directly into the conflict between the desire for freedom and the fear of it. And here is the question no one can avoid. If happiness is truly within reach, why do we continue to delay? Why do we choose familiar suffering instead of reaching for an unknown joy? Perhaps unhappiness is sometimes more comfortable because it gives us an excuse not to change. That question is the door opening the journey. There is no guarantee that after finishing, you will be happy in the way society preaches. But certainly, you will not be able to return to the person you were. And perhaps that is the very beginning of freedom. Before we dive into the review, we encourage listeners to buy and read the book to fully experience its depth. Only when you read this work in its entirety will you truly grasp the issues I am sharing. Please support the author by purchasing a copy. Now, let's begin the review. Night falls on the outskirts of the ancient city, dim light flickering through a small window. A young man, his face shadowed by dissatisfaction, knocks on the door of a room filled with books. The person he seeks is an elderly philosopher, famous for arguments many consider eccentric, that the world is simple, people can change, and happiness is accessible to anyone. To the young man, all of that sounds like nothing but a joke. He walks in and plops down in a chair, his eyes flashing with skepticism. Do you truly believe everything is simple? That the chaos, the injustices, and the traumas I and so many others carry are just a fog of our own making? The world I perceive is complex, full of contradictions, and humans are inherently weak. How can they possibly change? The philosopher smiles slightly and pours a cup of tea, his voice calm. Do you think a well is cool in summer and warm in winter? The temperature remains 18°C, unchanged, but perception depends on the observer. The world is not complex. It is merely a reflection seen through dark-tinted glasses. If you take them off, you will see a different world. The only question is, do you have enough courage to remove them? The young man is momentarily stunned. Before he can object, the old man continues, I do not only inherit from ancient Greece, but also follow the profound lineage of Alfred Adler, the third giant of modern psychology. He did not believe in the binding power of the past. He said, it is not experiences that shape a person, but the way a person uses those experiences that determines who they become. The youth frowns. If so, is all suffering just an excuse? A person abused by parents or trampled by friends, do they not carry wounds for a lifetime? No, the philosopher says slowly, there is no such thing as trauma determining destiny. There are only goals that humans strive for in the present. Look at the friend you mentioned, the one who has shut himself in his room for years. He wants to change. He wants to step into the light. But he trembles the moment he touches the threshold. You think it is a consequence of the past, but I say it is a choice of the present. He does not want to go outside, so he created anxiety to justify staying in. Absurd. The young man jumps up. How could anyone invent fear or conjure up an illness just to imprison themselves? The philosopher looks straight into his eyes, his voice still steady. The anxiety, the tremors, even the physical pain he might experience, all are palpably real. But understand, they are created to serve a purpose, to avoid the outside world. This is the vision of teleology. Freud looks at causes. Adler looks at goals. I do not deny feelings, but I deny determinism. The past does not control the present. It is only material for us to assign meaning. People act not because they are pushed, but because they are pulling themselves toward a predetermined goal. The young man trembles with anger. Are you saying my friend is faking his illness? That I am also just bringing suffering upon myself? No one is faking, he explains, but every action has a hidden purpose. Even anger is like that. You believe anger is an instinct of flame that bursts out beyond control. But the truth is, people often create anger to achieve their ends. The young man smirks. To begin with this, I shout at a waiter when he spills coffee on my shirt. You dare say that isn't a natural reaction? The old man tells another story. A mother screams at her daughter. Suddenly the phone rings. As soon as she picks up, her voice immediately becomes sweet and polite to talk to a teacher. The call ends and she returns to screaming. You see, anger can be put away and taken out like a tool. People get angry not because they cannot control it, but because they need it to coerce others. The atmosphere in the room becomes heavy. The young man bites his lip. Deep down, he understands how terrifying this argument is. It takes away the life jacket of the past defines me, but at the same time, a strange ray of light flickers. If the past doesn't chain us, then whose hands is the future in but our own? The philosopher gently concludes, people do not suffer because of what happened, but because of the meaning they assign to it. If you accept that, the door to change will open. But whether you step through or not depends entirely on your courage. The young man leans back, his eyes full of storms. He cannot accept being seen as someone who brings suffering upon himself. If you are right, then are the intense emotions I experience all fake? You want to deny all humanity just to protect the cold theory. The elderly man shakes his head. No, I do not deny emotions. Everyone has anger, sadness, and panic. But the crucial point is that humans are not controlled by emotions or the past. We are the ones who use them, turning them into tools. If you accept this, you will see that we are not bound to a fixed fate. To illustrate, he tells the story of a woman who always blushes. She yearns for love, but the fear of rejection weighs heavy. So she creates the fear of blushing as a reason to avoid confessing her love. She uses that weakness as a shield to avoid a more painful blow, rejection. The young man sits in silence, gradually understanding that even the things we hate about ourselves can be what we hold onto, to avoid a harsher truth. So you mean, he whispered softly, even hating myself could be a choice? Exactly, the philosopher nodded. Many people immerse themselves in a sense of inferiority simply to avoid the friction of real life. In doing so, they create an excuse. I do not step outside not because I am a coward, but because I am imperfect. In truth, that very imperfection is a choice made to avoid the risk of rejection. The air grew thick as the young man began to realize a paradox. People choose unhappiness because it yields a secondary gain. That benefit could be attention, pity, or simply a convenient excuse to evade challenges. But does that mean I, or anyone else, am to blame? His voice trembled, laced with anger. I didn't choose my circumstances, I didn't choose my parents, and I didn't choose my childhood wounds. The old man slightly raised his eyebrows. True, you did not choose where you were born, but from this moment onward, you choose how to live. You choose the path. That is what we call lifestyle. It is not destiny, nor is it a gift from heaven. It is a decision sometimes unconscious made in your youth. And if it was once chosen, it can also be re-chosen. The young man let out a dry, dismissive laugh. If it is that simple, why am I still sitting here trapped in dissatisfaction? If I just need to choose again, why can't I do it right now? The philosopher sighed, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. Because you lack one thing. Not ability, but courage. People always claim they want to change. But change means plunging into an unpredictable void where no one guarantees happiness. Thus, most choose to remain with familiar suffering rather than face uncertainty. The young man sat paralyzed. He remembered a friend who dreamed of becoming a novelist, but, year after year, never submitted a manuscript. He always complained, work is too busy, time isn't sufficient, the environment isn't right. But deep down, it was the raw fear of rejection. He only wants to maintain an illusion. I could do it if I had the chance. The fear of failure has become the chains keeping him in his safety zone. The philosopher placed the teacup on the table. His voice articulate. Humans often manufacture excuses to avoid taking a step. The more excuses, the less action. But the truth is that happiness does not come from if only daydreams, but from decisions made here and now. The young man felt his heart tighten. For years, he had lived in an illusion. If I were different, if circumstances were better, if I were luckier, but not once had he truly chosen to change. The The room fell into silence. The ticking of the clock seemed to beat the rhythm for a bitter, hard-to-swallow revelation. The philosopher spoke softly, almost whispering, "No one is bound by the past. The past only exists as a story we retell ourselves. What determines your life is the choice you make at this very moment." The young man clenched his fists, feeling a storm of anger and confusion. A part of him wanted to argue, to prove the old man wrong, but another fragile part longed to believe, because if these words were true, he would finally have a chance to change his life. And that chance, though terrifying, shone brighter than the darkness that had imprisoned him for so long. The young man stared intensely at the old man, hundreds of questions surging within him. "You say I choose unhappiness. You say I chose even this distorted personality, but I don't remember ever choosing. When I opened my eyes, I was already like this. How can you hold me responsible for something I wasn't conscious of?" The old man nodded, familiar with the struggle. No one clearly remembers the moment they decided which path to follow. Adler called it lifestyle, a pattern formed in childhood, usually around the age of 10. At that time, a child stands before the world and outlines a way to exist, to be cautious or bold, to avoid or to face. That initial decision was unconscious, influenced by family and environment. But once chosen, it becomes ingrained like a well-worn path. Humans then walk that path forever, believing it is their innate personality. The young man scoffed. "Then what is there to discuss? I've already chosen. It's too late to change." On the contrary, the old man replied, "If a lifestyle is a choice, then it can always be re-chosen." He shook his head violently. "You don't understand. Change means plunging into darkness. If I abandon this way of living, what will become of me? Will I even know who I am?" "That is exactly the point," the old man said slowly. "You call it impossible to change, but in reality, it is not daring to change. People cling to familiar suffering because it feels safe, like navigating a rickety old car. It creaks, but you know every sound. With a new car, you cannot predict when it might break down. People accept predictable suffering over unknown happiness." The room seemed to grow heavy. The young man felt an uncomfortable truth eroding his every excuse. Had he intentionally held on to dissatisfaction to avoid the risk of a new life? The old man continued, his voice stern. "Humans do not lack ability, only courage. The courage to change, the courage to be happy. For happiness, after all, is also a burden. It requires us to stand firm, shoulder responsibility, and stop making excuses. Many choose suffering because it is easy. It gives them the right to complain. But choosing happiness means accepting to live fully, with no place left to hide." The young man remained silent. In his head, conflicting voices echoed. "I want to change, but I can't versus I long for happiness, but I am afraid of it." The old man seemed to hear his innermost thoughts. "You can continue living as before, imprisoning yourself in a loop of dissatisfaction, citing endless causes for justification. Or you can stand up and admit that everything up to now has been chosen by you. From here, you can choose again. Life is determined right here and right now." A long silence followed. The young man looked around the room, filled with books, sensing the eternity of these ideas. He realized the old man's words were not a lash, but a clarion mirror reflecting directly into his deepest depths. And in that mirror, he saw a trembling face, but eyes flashing with a fragile light, the light of the possibility of being different. "I may not believe everything yet," he whispered, "but I will return. I want to continue the debate. I want to know if you are truly right or just a person deluding yourself." The old man smiled slightly, his eyes kind. "I do not need you to believe immediately. I only need you to dare to ask questions. The answer lies not in my mouth, but in the choices you are about to make outside." The night wind blew through the dark streets. The young man stood up, fear mixed with hope rising within him. On the threshold, he turned his head back. The old man still sat there, motionless as a statue, but his eyes were bright like a lamp lighting the way for one still bewildered. A week after the first dialogue, the young man returned to that small room overflowing with books. This time, he came not to find common ground, but to refute to strike down the arguments that had caused him to lose sleep throughout the journey. He had told himself, he is wrong. Humans cannot escape the chains of the past just by relying on present choices. I will prove him wrong. The elderly man smiled to welcome him, as if he had anticipated the reunion. As soon as the youth sat down, the debate erupted again. "Last week you said the past does not determine the present," the young man began, his voice full of defiance. "I thought carefully, and I still find that absurd. For instance, right here with me, I hate myself. I look in the mirror and see only flaws, unable to find a single point to love. How do you explain that using your teleology theories? The old man took a sip of tea, his eyes lighting up with certainty. All human problems are, at their core, problems of interpersonal relationships. If you were the only person left in the universe, no worries would exist. Even when you say you hate yourself, it is actually a strategic consequence of the fear of relationships. You withdraw, criticizing yourself so you don't have to step out, so you don't have to face the scrutiny of others. The young man frowned. This thought pierced a hidden place he wanted no one to touch. Self-loathing is a way to avoid others. Correct, the old man continued. Inferiority is just a subjective assumption. There is no objective measure that determines one's inherent worth. You yourself assign meaning to the experience and then turn it into chains. To illustrate, he spoke of a short person. In the eyes of comparison, it is a disadvantage, but placed in a different context, height makes others feel less guarded, more approachable. What we call a flaw is just a point of view. When the perspective changes, the disadvantage turns into an advantage. The young man laughed awkwardly, saying that is no different from deceiving oneself. A short person is still short. Everyone sees it. The old man replied calmly, being short is not the problem. The problem is what meaning you assign to it. Being short is being inferior, or being short is being worthless. But that meaning does not exist objectively. It only exists in your own sight. You do not suffer because of height, but because of comparison. The young man fell silent, feeling exposed. He remembered how many times he stood in a crowd, averting his eyes because he felt inferior. But did others truly care that much? Or was it all just a self-woven web of illusions he believed in? The old man set his teacup down, his voice deepening. Humans suffer not because of who they are, but because of how they define themselves in the eyes of others. You are not afraid of yourself. You are afraid of the gaze. Therefore, inferiority is not a reality. It is a choice to avoid relationships. In a quiet room, these words rang out like a hammer blow. The young man felt both angry and convinced. Angry because he was stripped of his excuses, convinced because deep down, he knew those things made sense. The old man did not stop. Do not confuse the event with the meaning. Whether you are tall or short, beautiful or ugly, smart or ordinary is just an event of fact. But whether their meaning is good or bad, a hindrance or a support, is determined by you. And when you believe in that meaning, you turn it into a cage. The chains that bind us are, in truth, forged and locked by ourselves. The young man took a deep breath. This time, instead of protesting, he fell silent in thought. Could it be that every time he hated himself, every time he bowed his head before the gaze of others, it was all just a way he built barriers so he wouldn't have to connect? The old man observed and then spoke softly. Do not get confused. Inferiority in itself is not bad. It can become a healthy motivation that makes you want to learn and grow. But when you turn it into an excuse when you say I can't because I am short, or because I am inferior, that is when inferiority turns into shackles. That is what Adler called an inferiority complex, an excuse. The young man looked up, his eyes flashing with frustration. You want to blame me again? That even my suffering is just a game of making excuses? The old man did not flinch. Yes, suffering becomes an excuse for us not to move forward. We say because of that, I am unhappy to avoid challenges, friction, and failure. But in return, we also forfeit the opportunity to live differently. The air grew tense. The young man clenched his hands. In his heart, he knew he had done this many times. When seeing friends succeed, he would sigh, I am not equal to them because I was born inferior. But wasn't that sentence also an excuse to avoid effort, to avoid accepting the risk of failure? The old man leaned forward. You see, even those who constantly boast of their achievements are merely masking their deep-seated inferiority. When someone feels the need to emphasize their strengths, they are searching for a way to cover a void inside. That boasting is nothing more than a thin, fragile veil. The more one flaunts, the more they prove their fear of being judged. The young man smirked, smiling bitterly. So inferiority, boasting, or unhappiness is it all just a game of hiding? Not necessarily. They are the ways humans choose to face or to flee. But remember this well. Life is not a race. Comparison is the root of suffering. You imagine you are competing with others, but in truth, you are only imprisoning yourself in an endless loop. The winner lives in fear of losing this status, while the loser remains forever crushed by inferiority. The young man fell silent and then let out a hollow laugh. But are you sure? Look around. This society is built entirely on comparison. People flaunt wealth, power, and education. Even friendship is tainted by competition. How can I possibly escape? The old man replied with a firm voice, You cannot change others, but you can change how you look at things. If you withdraw from the race no longer exists. In that moment, a paradox flashed through the young man's mind. All the competition he imagined as a storm outside actually existed, only in the eyes of the participant. If he stopped running, the storm would vanish. The old man continued, his voice steady yet piercing. The obsession with appearance, possessions, and achievements is actually just our own projection. You imagine others are evaluating your every move, but for the most part, they are too busy with their own lives to care. Only you are imprisoning yourself in a warped mirror, seeing judgmental eyes everywhere. The young man suddenly remembered how many times he walked down the street, feeling like everyone was mocking his stature or his gait, but in reality, they likely passed by without a second thought. Yet he had turned their shadows into chains. The old man concluded, from those comparisons, humans easily slide into another spiral. Power struggles. People want to win, to be superior, to make others submit. But that struggle never ends. It escalates into revenge and hatred. The more one fights, the further one drifts from true freedom. The room fell into silence. The young man swallowed, feeling both heavy and enlightened. What the old man said was hard to swallow, yet it fit into the void in his heart like a key fitting into a rusted lock. He sat dazed as images of past infighting and meaningless arguments flooded his mind. Everything revolved around a single desire, to prove he was better than others. Because of that, he was always bracing himself, craving victory while paralyzed by the fear of loss. The old man spoke in a deep voice. In truth, admitting a mistake is not a defeat. Only when you believe life is a war does admitting a mistake equate to surrender. But if life is not a war, then admitting a fault is merely the act of removing a burden to step out of the power struggle. In that moment, you are free. The young man frowned. You make it sound easy. But we live in a society, how can we avoid friction? In the end, doesn't everyone have to struggle to survive? The old man shook his head. No, my child. Humans exist not to snatch things away, but to face the tasks of life, friendship, work, and love. Everyone must enter these three realms. They cannot be avoided, and in each, the real challenge is not winning or losing, but daring to be present, daring to connect. Hearing this, a sense of unease rose within the young man. The word love triggered memories of a broken relationship where he had withdrawn. Due to his own inferiority, he still believed he was not good enough, utterly unworthy. Perhaps that was one of the life lies the old man was about to mention. Exactly. The old man nodded as if reading his thoughts. When we erect false reasons to avoid these tasks, we live in a life lie. Some cite poor health, some use work as a screen, others cling to inferiority to avoid the risk of loving or taking responsibility. Those excuses sound reasonable, but in truth, they are just a veil for fear. The young man clenched his fists, remembering his own repertoire of excuses. I'm not ready. It's not the right fit. I'm not good enough. Weren't all those phrases just shells to keep him from stepping into the light? The old man continued, if you keep looking at life with a mindset of possession what I have, what I lack, you will always be miserable. You will always compare and always find excuses. But if you switch to a mindset of practice what I do, how I act, everything changes. Your value then does not come from what you hold, but from how you contribute and engage. And no one can take that away. The young man paused. Those words were like a blade cutting the suffocating cords. For so long, he had viewed life through the lens of possession. I don't have the looks, the background, or the talent. But if the perspective changed, if value lay in action, then those deficiencies suddenly lost their power over him. The old man emphasized, liberation does not come from having more, but from daring to act. When you enter a relationship with a mindset of contribution instead of comparison, freedom opens up and inferiority finds no place to take root. The space fell into silence. The young man looked up, feeling as if a ray of light had seeped through the cracks of his mind. The chains that were once heavy now felt fragile. So, he said softly, all problems, small or large, lead back to interpersonal relationships, and how I choose to look at them determines who I am. The old man smiled kindly. You understand now. Life is not a stage for competition, but a path to walk alongside others. When you stop comparing, stop erecting life lies, and start acting with a mindset of practice, you will see the burden vanish. The young man remained silent for a long time. In his eyes, there was no longer the sharp defiance from before, but instead a hint of contemplation. He hadn't completely accepted the ideas, but he knew he had been moved. Above all, he realized he no longer wanted to abandon this debate. Outside, the night was still dark, but in the small room, another light was flickering. The second dialogue closed with a sobering truth. All human problems are interpersonal relationship problems. And when we change the way we enter those relationships, we change life itself. Night fell again, and the young man returned. His expression was a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The previous dialogues had left him flustered. One made him admit that the past does not determine the present. Another made him accept that inferiority is a choice, not destiny. But regarding this next point, he was determined to refute it to the end. He believed there was an undeniable human need, the desire for recognition. You can say humans are not tied by the past. You can say inferiority is just a choice. But you cannot deny that each of us craves validation. He said firmly, I want my parents to be proud. I want my friends to acknowledge me. And I want society to look at me with respect. Without recognition, what is the point of living? The old man sat there, his eyes as deep as a dry well. He took a sip of tea and softly replied, that very desire is the greatest invisible chain. When you live to be recognized, you relinquish your autonomy to the gaze of others. You are happy when praised, miserable when criticized, and every step you take is controlled by external expectations. You call that living, but in reality, it is merely existing in the prison of public opinion. The young man frowned in protest. But without recognition, everyone will be lonely. Humans are born to connect. If you deny that need, aren't you turning us into beings detached from the world? It is not about denying connection, the old man said, but about drawing a clear line of demarcation. Connection does not mean dependence. You can live with others without having to live to please them. Only when you dare to refuse the trap of recognition can you truly step into freedom. The youth shook his head. The freedom you speak of sounds egocentric. If I don't care about the expectations of others, can I still be called a part of a community? The old man smiled slightly. This is the paradox you have yet to see. You imagine that living for recognition is what creates a bond, but in truth, that is just a hollow relationship built on bargaining. You please them to trade for recognition. They recognize you in exchange for your compliance. That is not connection, but a disguised contract. True connection only comes when each person lives true to their own task. Task? He asked in surprise. Correct. I call it the principle of separation of tasks. Every human being has their own business. Problems only arise when we intrude upon the boundaries, taking others' business as our own, or surrendering our business to them. That is the source of all entanglement in relationships. The young man let out a cynical laugh. Sounds like distant philosophy. My task, their task. How do you propose to draw the line? The old man looked straight at him, his voice articulate. That boundary lies in the outcome. Ask yourself, who ultimately receives the result of this choice? If an action has a result that directly impacts someone, then it is that person's task. For example, when you confess your love to someone, the act of expressing yourself is your task. But whether the other person responds or not, that is their task. You can speak sincere words, but you cannot command another person's heart. He was stunned. Until now, he had always thought of love as a blending of two souls bound as one. But through this interpretation, he realized his confusion. How many times had he been angry because a loved one did not respond as he wished, believing he had a right to their affection? In truth, that was never his task to control. The old man continued, when you live to please others, you have stepped into their task. You carry their emotions for them, seeking ways to manipulate them into accepting you. And when things don't go your way, you become resentful. But if you maintain the boundary, this is my business, that is theirs, the burden vanishes. We are left only with the duty of living true to our own part. The young man shook his head, his voice harsh. You are turning everything into a formula. Life isn't that simple. If I don't care about others' feelings, I will be seen as irresponsible and heartless. The old man replied gently, on the contrary, knowing how to separate tasks is not being irresponsible. Rather, it is the only way to avoid interference and manipulation. You take responsibility for your own actions, but you do not claim the right to decide the reactions of others. Respecting that boundary is the root of true responsibility. The youth pressed his hand against his forehead as if to brush away what he had just heard. It sounded neat, but real life was much more complex. If I draw the line as clearly as you say, won't I turn into a selfish person? People will say I only think of myself. The old man looked directly at him, his voice deep but decisive. Wrong. When you dare to say, from here on, it is no longer my business, you are not being heartless. You are respecting the freedom of others. It is when you interfere, when you try to control their feelings and choices, that you are truly being selfish. He knit his brows. I don't understand yet. Can you give a specific example? Certainly. Suppose in love, you express your feelings, that is your task. But whether the other person accepts or not, that is their task. If you demand they respond, you have stepped into their task. Love is not a power struggle of obligation, but the freedom to meet one another. He fell silent. His past relationship flickered back the times he was angry, the times he begged, and the utter disappointment when the other person did not love him as he expected. It turned out that for so long, he had only been trying to manipulate someone else's heart in the name of love. The old man continued. Another example, parents opposing your career choice. They yell, claiming you are squandering your potential. You feel miserable and start living according to their wishes to gain their recognition. But remember, choosing a career is your task. Thinking and judging that choice is the parent's task. If they are disappointed, that is their business. You cannot carry that burden for them. He was startled. That story touched an old wound. For many years, he had lived in the shadow of family expectations. With every decision, he weighed what his parents would say or how they would look at him. Until he felt he was no longer himself, the old man looked into his eyes. A gaze that seemed to pierce deep. Life becomes heavy precisely because you carry the business of others. You do things for them, endure for them, only to harbor resentment for their imposition. But in truth, it was you who surrendered your own freedom. He muttered, if so, should I just ignore everything? If my parents cry, if they suffer, should I just walk away calmly? It is not about ignoring. You can still listen, you can still understand. But in the end, whoever the decision belongs to must carry the result. If you blur these boundaries, you will lose yourself, and they will never be able to grow. The space seemed to settle. Outside, the wind whistled through dry branches. Inside the young man's heart, the storm was even more violent. The old man's words were like a blade severing the toxic cords of dependency with family, love, and friends. Strangely, he felt a profound sense of relief. The old man continued, his voice steady like a hammer driving deep. Imagine you are standing at a crossroads. One path is living according to expectations, carrying everyone else's burdens while harboring silent resentment. The other is living authentically within your own task, letting others live theirs. Which path leads to freedom? You cannot please everyone. You don't need to. The young man slowly nodded. For the first time, he clearly envisioned the boundary. What he says is his business. How others feel about it is theirs. So many conflicts and dissatisfactions were merely the result of a refusal to define these roles. But then he frowned. If I maintain boundaries like that, will I lose my connections? Will others abandon me? The old man smiled. You only lose relationships based on control and obligation. Real connections, where each person respects the other's task, will only grow stronger. Then friendship, love, and family become voluntary encounters, not chains. In that moment, a light flashed through the youth's heart. Perhaps life is much lighter if he simply knows how to say, from here on, this is no longer my business. The room fell into silence. The youth looked down at his hands. They trembled as if they had just let go of a crushing weight, yet also as if they were grasping something new. The old man slowly set down his teacup, his gaze kind yet sharp as a blade. Do you know why many people's lives are always tangled? He asked. Because they struggle within the tangled web of expectation, control, and resentment. They try to untie every knot, but the more they struggle, the tighter it becomes. There's only one way. Cut the knot. Cut it. The young man looked up in surprise. Correct. Think of Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot. People had tried to untie it for years, but no one succeeded. He did not waste time untying it. He drew his sword and slashed it in two. Likewise, in relationships, if you keep trying to untie the impossible, you will fall into an endless spiral. Only when you dare to separate tasks, this is my business, that is theirs, can you cut through the mess and become free. The young man bowed his head. He thought of his past, friendships full of jealousy, love full of control. Through years of living under family pressure, he had tried to reconcile, to please everyone, only to end up exhausted. Now, the image of that decisive slash shook his heart. The desire to be recognized makes us lose our freedom, the old man continued. You imagine you are living within a community, but in truth, you are just performing on a stage set up by others. If they praise you, you are happy. If they criticize, you are in pain. Every gesture revolves around external eyes. That is disguised slavery. The youth bit his lip. He recalled his anxiety over social media likes and the gaze of others. A few praises made him elate, but a single criticism made him collapse. He had long ago surrendered the agency of his life to others. The old man leaned back. True freedom begins when you live only with your task, no longer dominated by external judgments. Then you no longer need praise to be happy, nor do you fear criticism. You are left only with the question, what must I do with my part? The young man's eyes flashed with unease. But if I live like that, will I be hated? If I don't cater to them, won't they turn their backs? The old man smiled, perhaps. But remember, being hated is not a tragedy. It is proof that you are living true to your task. Those who abandon you because you do not meet their expectations, never truly connected with you anyway. Only those who respect boundaries and your freedom will stay. A cold chill ran down the youth's spine. That thought was terrifying yet liberating. The fear of being hated had been the greatest chain, forcing him to suffocate his own identity just to please the world. The old man tapped the table. Do you see? The cards in every relationship are always in your hand. When you live for recognition, you give the whole deck to others. They can cheer or humiliate you, and your life fluctuates with their every move. But when you focus only on your task, you hold the cards. How they react is their business. You maintain your freedom. The young man closed his eyes and took a long breath. In his mind, the tangled strings faded, giving way to a straight, open road empty, yet full of light. Perhaps, he said slowly, I'd have lived along in the prison of recognition. I thought I craved love, but in truth, I only craved superficial applause. I thought I was being responsible, but I was just interfering in others' business. If I cut those knots, perhaps my life will finally be light. The old man smiled. He knew the youth had reached the threshold of an awakening. The third night closed with a shocking truth. Happiness begins when we dare to discard the tasks of others. For only then can we live as free human beings, holding our own cards, no longer slaves to the eyes of the world. The night was silent as the young man returned, but his mindset had shifted. He no longer saw only to refute. A part of him had begun to crave a real solution. The old man watched silently and then said, what we shared before about discarding the tasks of others was only the starting point. You can separate boundaries to reduce the burden, but if you stop there, you will live in isolation. Humans cannot simply sever ties with the community. The real question is, how can we live together without losing our freedom? The youth knit his brows. What do you mean? If I don't let others control me, will I still be connected to them? The old man nodded slightly. This is the vital question. Individual psychology emphasizes that a human being is a whole that cannot be separated from the world. We do not exist as detached fragments, but as part of a grand, interconnected tapestry. Therefore, the destination of every relationship is not just setting boundaries, but finding a profound sense of social interest. Social interest? What does that mean? The young man asked. It is when you can sincerely say, I belong here. Being here is enough, no need to compare, no need to prove anything. That is the root of happiness, the feeling that you have a place within the vast whole. The young man fell silent. Memories of the past flooded back. How many times he had stood in a crowd feeling displaced, seeking validation just to soothe the ache of not belonging. Perhaps those anxieties stemmed from a total lack of social interest. The old man continued, but to achieve that, you must first answer one question. Why do you only care about yourself? You are consumed by inferiority, by the craving for acknowledgement, and the fear of being ridiculed. Everything revolves around yourself. You imagine the world is watching you intently. But in truth, it is not. Everyone is busy with their own lives. You are not the center of the world. Those words were like a blade cutting through the youth's thoughts. He had lived for years in a spiral of self-centeredness. Am I good enough? Am I loved? Am I being laughed at? It turned out all of it was just an illusion of a central position that he himself had erected. You envision the world as a stage where all eyes are on you, the old man went on. But in fact, Everyone is an actor on their own stage, worrying about their own role. You imagine you are being judged for every gesture, but for the most part, no one notices. It is your own self-centeredness that causes you suffering, not the world out there. The youth bowed his head, embarrassment rising within him. He had tormented himself thinking people looked down on his incompetence, but perhaps they hadn't even bothered to care. The harshest, most scrutinizing gaze turned out to be not from the outside, but from his own eyes. The old man poured more tea, his voice deep yet warm. When you stop seeing yourself as the center, you begin to hear a larger voice, the voice of the community. It could be the whisper of a neighbor or the heartbeat of society. At that moment, you no longer live to seek recognition, but to participate, to cooperate, and to contribute. The youth slowly raised his head, defiance flickering alongside a fragile light in his eyes. You say that, but if I am not the center, will I have any value left? If I am just a drop in a sea of people, will I simply disappear? The old man smiled. On the contrary, true value does not come from standing at the center, but from the resonance found when you harmonize with the whole. A solitary person can scream loudly, but it remains a disjointed sound. When joined together, that voice becomes a song. In that moment, the youth's heart wavered. Perhaps instead of trying to seize the spotlight, he only needed to dare to step out and sing with others. Outside, the night wind still blew. Inside the room, a shocking truth was revealed. Humans are not the center of the world, yet they find freedom and happiness precisely when they know they belong to a community. The young man remained silent for a long while. I am not the center of the world. The thought was both liberating and bewildering. If he wasn't the center, would his life have any meaning? The old man, sensing his concern, continued, "Don't just look at the narrow community around you, family, friends, or work. Those are only the near circles. There are much larger communities to which you belong. When we expand our vision and hear the call of the larger circles, we find ourselves relieved, no longer obsessed with I, but liberated by we." The youth knit his brows. But if I just dissolve into large communities, will I lose myself? Will I become an anonymous, blurred figure? The old man shook his head. On the contrary, when you only struggle with your ego, you make yourself small. But when you look outward, you become part of a great flow. Value does not lie in being praised, but in being a contributor. The youth sat still, remembering the days he locked himself in his room, rejecting the world. He thought it was a way to protect his ego. But now he realized that was exactly when he truly disappeared. The old man's tone became sharp. What causes many relationships to break is that people do not know how to build horizontal relationships. They insist on living in vertical ones. Horizontal versus vertical. He repeated, "Correct. When you scold someone, you place yourself in a superior position. When you praise, you are also implicitly saying I am above you. We judge, and then we grant a reward." Scolding and praising are two sides of the same coin. Control. You think praise is a form of affection, but in truth, it erects a vertical relationship, turning the other person into a subordinate. The youth's eyes widened. "You mean even praising is dangerous?" The old man nodded. "Not bad, but dangerous. If you get used to living for praise, you will believe that only when you receive it do you have value. You become dependent on external measures and lose your freedom." He remembered how many times he threw himself into work just to hear words of acclaim. When he received them, he was ecstatic. When he didn't, he felt hollow. Indeed, he had never seen his own value apart from the eyes of others. The old man continued, "Instead of praising or scolding, use another way, encouragement." The youth was surprised. How is encouragement different from praise? Encouragement does not place anyone above or below. It is not judgmental, but an acknowledgement through authentic gratitude. For example, instead of saying you are so good, say thank you for helping. Because of you, things were easier for me. Encouragement awakens the courage to continue acting, rather than binding someone with rewards or judgment. He sat lost in memory, recalling the time a friend simply said, "I'm glad you're here." Those words were not praise, but they kept him warm for days. It turned out that was the true power of encouragement. The old man spoke sternly. "If you truly want to build horizontal relationships, abandon the habit of scolding and praising. Learn to speak words of sincere gratitude. Validate presence and effort rather than judging the result. In doing so, you no longer create subordinates or superiors, but true companions." The young man sat in silence, filled with new questions. Before, He thought praise was the most beautiful thing in a relationship, the ultimate proof of love. Now, the old man argued that even praise could erode your autonomy. This thought confused him, yet it suggested something far deeper. The old man continued leisurely, "Try to remember. When praised, you feel joy, but you also feel an immediate pressure. You think, what if I'm not praised next time? What if I fail?" Thus, you begin to act not out of true desire, but to maintain the praise. By living for applause, you lose your freedom and turn yourself into a tool for external metrics. The youth shuddered. So many times he had labored not out of passion, but merely to maintain a polished image. Every praise had become an invisible shackle. Every cold look had turned into a heavy shadow. Indeed, he had never been truly free. Then, he asked in a raspy voice, "If there is no praise or scolding, how do humans perceive their own value?" The old man smiled. "Value does not come from judgment. It comes from contribution. When you know you have been helpful, when you have lightened someone's burden, you feel a sense of utility. That feeling does not depend on who praises or scolds. It is born from the action itself." The young man recalled helping an elderly person cross the street. No one praised him, and no one even noticed, yet in that moment, he felt a genuine warmth in his heart. It turned out value could emerge from such silent, unobserved moments. Discard the mindset of possession. What do I have? What do I lack? The old man urged. Live instead with the mindset of practice. What am I doing? For value does not lie in assets or achievements, but in your presence and your giving. When you live to contribute, you no longer fear losing value. Because it does not depend on the eyes of others, the youth breathed deeply, a strange sense of relief rising in his chest. Perhaps he had been searching for value in all the wrong places, in medals, in grades, in praise, and in the hungry gaze of recognition. But true value, as the old man said, was present in simple, daily actions. Image representing the hic et nunc. Living in the moment, the old man looked into the distance, his voice deepening. Humans can only find freedom when they learn to exist in the present, the hic et nunc. Do not chase the praise or blame of the past. Do not worry about the eyes of the future. Live fully in this moment, where you can act, cooperate, and encourage. The young man closed his eyes to let the words sink in. Scenes flashed through his mind. Days obsessed with the world's gaze. Long nights tormented by the past, and endless anxieties about the future. It all turned out to be just a shadow he had been clinging to. Perhaps, he whispered, perhaps I have never truly lived. I've just been performing for others, chasing superficial applause. If I discard all that, will I have enough courage to be truly present in this moment? The old man looked at him, his gaze kind yet firm. The courage to be present, that is the most important courage of all. Not the courage to fight, nor the courage to win, but the courage to live true to yourself. Here and now, when you have it, you no longer need the spotlight, because life itself shines from within. In the quiet room, the youth sat motionless. For the first time in years, he felt his heart was no longer heavy with comparison or expectation. Instead, there was a strange emptiness, not a scary one, but one like an open sky. The fourth night closed with a simple truth. No one is the center of the world, but everyone can find value in contribution and encouragement, and in being fully present in the now. In the old room, the oil lamp cast faint shadows on the weathered walls. The young man sat down, looking as if he were carrying an invisible boulder on his shoulders. Despite the previous nights, his heart was not yet at peace. Something was still holding him back, suffocating his ability to live fully. He spoke, his voice raspy. I feel constantly tense when I step out on the street, when I face others. A single passing glance makes me feel small and clumsy. I don't dare to laugh naturally or act comfortably. I am haunted by the thought that they will find me ridiculous, that they will mock me. I am living, but it feels as if I am tied up. The old man nodded. That is excessive self-consciousness. You think you are being alert, but in fact, it is an invisible net tightening around you. You think you are living cautiously, but you are just dying slowly under a phantom gaze. He clenched his fists. It was true. He had never dared to live authentically, always acting out a role on a stage before an undefined audience. The old man looked straight at him, his voice firm. Humans do not need self-affirmation. They need self-acceptance. What is the difference? He asked in surprise. Self-affirmation is when you delude yourself. I am perfect. I am talented. I am 100%. But deep down, you know it's a lie. You become even more bewildered because those words do not align with reality. Self-acceptance is different. It is when you look at yourself and say, I am currently only 60%. I still have flaws, but I dare to move forward to become 70%, 80%, and keep going. He fell silent. So many times he had thumped his chest, telling himself, I'm fine, I can do it. But in the end, with just one criticism, that entire fragile facade crumbled. Perhaps he had confused affirmation with true acceptance, accepting what cannot be changed, and having the courage to change what can be changed. That is the path. The old man spoke slowly. If you keep denying your weaknesses, you will live forever in an illusion. But if you dare to look straight and say, I am lacking, but I will take one more step, then every day you move closer to maturity. The room fell silent. Outside, the night wind blew across the roof tiles, making them creak. Inside his heart, those words rang like a bronze bell. The old man continued, the 60% self is not for you to feel ashamed of, but to remind you that you still have the capacity to move forward. If you accept yourself as a work in progress, you will find the courage to keep building. The youth let out a soft sigh. But what if I remain weak? What if I never reach 100%? The old man smiled. No one reaches 100%. It is precisely imperfection that makes humans vivid. Life is not about proving you are perfect, but about advancing step by step within the limits you have. You will see that in that very imperfection, life finds its meaning. The youth sat in silence, thoughts swirling rapidly. Until now, he had always tormented himself over his shortcomings and strained to prove otherwise. But now, another path was opening. Accept what isn't sufficient and keep moving. The old man took a sip of tea. Remember, self-acceptance is not giving up. It is seeing your limits clearly and acting decisively within them. The young man sat still, his eyes reflecting a newfound contemplation. After hearing about the difference between self-affirmation and self-acceptance, he felt as if he had shaken off a heavy set of shackles. But at the same time, another worry arose. Even if I accept myself, he said, I still have to live among others. I have to believe in them, rely on them. But what if they betray me? What if they take advantage of me? The old man looked at him, his gaze gentle yet firm. You have just touched upon a crucial issue in human relations. There is a profound difference between trust credence and unconditional confidence. The youth leaned in, waiting. Trust is based on conditions. We only trust when we are sure the other party won't betray us. When we have evidence or hold some form of guarantee, it is a type of hidden contract. We give our trust only when the other party meets our terms. Trusting like that still carries the heavy color of control. The youth nodded. It was true. He used to trust friends, but only when they acted as he expected. The moment they strayed, that trust immediately collapsed. The old man continued, unconditional confidence is different. It is not based on conditions. Confidence is when we give others our reliance without demanding evidence or requiring it to be reciprocated. And if that confidence is taken advantage of, that is the other person's task, not ours. Our task is simply to live true to our own part. His eyes widened in protest. But that's just being utterly naive. Others will take advantage of me. The old man smiled. Perhaps. Sometimes you will be taken advantage of. But think of it this way. When you have confidence, you liberate yourself from the exhausting need for control. You no longer waste energy scrutinizing, doubting, or building walls. And it is that very confidence that creates horizontal relationships, where both meet as free human beings, no one above, no one below. The room grew quiet. He remembered a few rare moments when someone had placed unconditional reliance in him. In those moments, he felt a surge of desire to be better, so as not to let them down. Perhaps that was the hidden power of confidence. Let me speak of something else tied to confidence. The old man lightly tapped the table. The essence of labor is contribution to the common good. He knit his brows. What do you mean? Humans cannot live in isolation. The food you eat, the clothes you wear, the books you read, all are the results of the labor of countless others. Every task you do, however small, contributes to the common flow. When you work not to boast or be recognized, but to contribute, you will see that you possess inherent value. He recalled his days working part-time at a small shop. The work was grueling, but seeing customers leave satisfied brought him a strange joy. That joy didn't stem from his wages or praise, but from the quiet realization that he had played a part in creating a moment of ease. For someone else, the old man looked deep into his eyes. Contribution is not sacrifice. Sacrifice is when we act with resentment, expecting a return. Contribution is when we act with a sense of voluntary participation, knowing we are connected to the common pulse of life. It is in that moment you feel, it is okay for me to be here, and remember, the old man added softly, young people often have an advantage because they aren't yet bound to tightly by vertical relationships or paralyzed by the fear of being hated. They can move faster toward freedom provided they dare to live for their own tasks, dare to have confidence, and dare to contribute. A ray of light rose in the youth's heart. Perhaps his youth was not wasted. If he could only walk in the right direction, change was still possible. The young man leaned back, his eyes searching the distance. But one concern lingered. If everything is just contribution, where's the meaning of my life? If I am just a tiny link in a chain, isn't that ultimately meaningless? The old man nodded. Are you searching for meaning in a distant destination or in this very moment? If I don't think about the future, won't I lose my way? The old man set down his teacup. That is the ultimate life lie. People often say, endure the present for a brighter future, but that future never arrives. They say study now to work later, then work hard to build a career, then strive so the children can have a better life. Thus, throughout their entire existence, people never actually live. They only indefinitely postpone their lives. The youth was speechless. It was a mirror of his own life, years spent waiting for a day to truly begin. But that day was always over the horizon. Life is a series of moments, not a linear progression to climb. If you don't live right now, you will never live. Happiness is not at the end of the road. It lies in every footstep. Live as if you are dancing, the old man continued, his voice warm. When you dance, you don't dance to reach a specific spot on the floor. You dance for every movement, every beat of the music. You are serious yet free, present only in the dance. Life is the same. He closed his eyes, imagining himself dancing in an empty room, no audience, no judges, only the music and his breath. He felt an extraordinary sense of relief. Happiness can start right now, the old man said. No need to wait for tomorrow or a grand achievement. In this very moment, when you are present, when you encourage, when you contribute even a small part, you have touched happiness. So, I don't need to be special. I don't need to be praised. The youth whispered, exactly. The courage to be ordinary is the greatest courage of all, because being ordinary means we accept ourselves as a vital part of the community and find value in our contribution. Only then are you truly free, the old man concluded. Cast a spotlight on the present. The past is just a story that has passed. The future has not yet arrived. The young man looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. For the first time, he saw that happiness was not a vague promise, but a decision made right here, right now. Outside, the night wind still blew, but he no longer felt its chill. The fifth night closed with a final truth. Life is not a preparation for tomorrow. It is the present. Happiness needs no appointment. As the final pages close, we do not just finish a reading journey. We face a challenge to take what we have heard and felt and weave it into the fabric of our own lives. This philosophy is not a dry analysis. It is a radical invitation to step out of the habit of procrastination, out of the prison of the ego, and away from the judgmental gaze we once worshipped. What this journey leaves behind is not a formula for happiness, but a series of essential questions. Is the past truly a life sentence, or just the story we choose to tell? Is your inferiority a wound, or an excuse to stay still? Why do we crave recognition, even when it turns us into slaves? And above all, why do we evade the present, when it is the only thing we truly possess? I want to stop here, to send a sincere thank you to you, the one who has patiently followed these sometimes uncomfortable ideas. It is not easy to face the paradoxes this book exposes, and your presence in this moment is what keeps these ideas alive. I would love to hear from you. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Which point made you think the longest? Which contradiction left you most unsettled? What spark of light did you find for yourself? Every opinion is more than just feedback. It is an extension of this dialogue. If there is a book, a character, or an idea you want to explore next, please suggest it. For only with your voice do these journeys truly have meaning. This is not a final stop, but a pause for you to ask, will you let these ideas remain as memories, or will they shape a new way of living? The answer, as the old man said, can be given by no one but yourself. Thank you for listening. This has been the Book Vibe, and I will see you in the next chapter of our journey. Goodbye for now.